Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome very much to the second episode of Ghost Variations. It's a sort of personal Jessanori, as you will know if you heard episode 1. It's just me, Jessica Duchen, reading you my novel, Ghost Variations, in bleeding chunks of about 15 minutes each to help us get through this patch of unexpected confinement to quarters. Anyway, if you tuned in yesterday, you will have heard episode 1 in which Yeli Durrani and her assistant Anna Robertson have had a rather strange encounter with some friends in Hastings with interesting information from a homemade Ouija board. And we're just going to pick up where we left off yesterday. This episode will probably carry on end of chapter 1, beginning of chapter 2 until there's a decent stopping point. Here we go. Yeli, Ardila's American-Greek husband Alec Fakiri, their little girl Adrienne, and their yappy fox terrier named Caesar lived on a Chelsea cul-de-sac off the Fulham Road by St Stephen's Hospital and what used to be the workhouse, in a graceful Victorian villa with a fake Italian bell tower and tripartite windows. From within, the sky appeared to divide into 3, like a Renaissance altarpiece. Their friends dubbed the place Hurricane House. You'd understand why as soon as you went in and faced the piles of books, magazines and sheet music, along with the ornaments spilling off the shelves, vases, T-shirts, photographs, Hungarian dolls, Dresden china figurines, musical boxes that no longer worked, and the sound of instruments being practiced simultaneously in different rooms would blend now and then with the chime of clocks that never struck together. Here, Yeli felt as much at home as she could anywhere, now that their parents were dead. The 3 sisters and their mother, Antoinette, arrived in Britain when Yeli was 16, bringing with them little more than talent, charm, the good name of their great-uncle Joseph Joachim, and a handful of concert dates in Hazelmere. Yeli still remembered Veselényi Street in Budapest, where she spent her childhood, a dark chimney of a road snaking into town just behind the great synagogue of Duchen Street. How precarious their life must have been, and with what care their mother had concealed this. Yeli had been aware that times were growing tougher, with no idea why, and if Antoinette had had her own reason for wanting to leave her husband behind, she kept it to herself. These days, Yeli sometimes wondered what had passed between them, how much her mother had had in the bank, if anything, and whether the concerts that she and Ardila gave with their pianist sister Hortense had been out of volition or out of necessity. It was too late to ask. She could not pass the former workhouse without imagining how it must have felt to be its inmate. Though she earned relatively well for her performances and recordings, she knew she would have commanded still higher fees had she been a man, and that her imminent 40th birthday, had she been a man, would be seen as the start of her prime, not the end of it. Once she had dreamed about having her own house, but those earnings were not what they were 10 years ago, before the Depression, and Alec and Adila would not hear of her leaving them in any case. Still, she was well aware that she remained an unpaying guest in their home. In her darker moments, perhaps a maiden aunt. Joking about her nomadic concert life, declaring, "I'm a gypsy," she could never quite escape the sensation of glassy surfaces under her feet, slippery to walk on, easy to shatter. It was nearly lunchtime when Yeli arrived home from Eastbourne via Victoria Station. On the steps, in her old mink coat, juggling suitcase, violin case, handbag and keys, and listening with delight to Caesar's piercing welcome home bark, she caught a glimpse of Mrs. Garrett next door, slipping away from an upstairs window. The Garretts did not consider the foreigners at number 10 entirely suitable people, especially not Yeli, whom they knew was unwed, went on the stage, sponged off her brother-in-law, and kept peculiar hours. Yeli smiled and waved. Then came the skittering of Adrienne's feet on the hall floor, and her little niece hurtled out into her arms. "Auntie Yeye!" "Hush, sweetheart, you'll scare the neighbours." Yeli laughed, dropping everything and lifting her to cover her face with kisses. "Oof, what a big girl you are." Adrienne gave a giggle, smoothing her cheek against the fur of her aunt's coat. Caesar charged through the doorway a second later, slobbering with joy all over Yeli's stockings. "Ach, Sai, darling, you're home. Today I know there will be a miracle." Adila stumped out in her house slippers, calling Yeli by her family nickname, pronounced Shy. Her hair stood out in intense curls around her head. To judge from her look, she had surfaced within the hour. Yeli put down Adrienne, and the sisters swamped each other with hugs and greetings. Adila's preternaturally dusky. She insisted that when she had had diphtheria, aged 9, it had affected her voice, pushing it down to the tenor register. "Tenor," Alec would joke. "Baritone, my dear." He always insisted he'd fallen in love first with her voice. It resembled his chosen instrument, the cello. "You've obviously been up for hours," Yeli teased her. "We had a late dinner after the concert." Adila pushed the door open to usher everyone inside. "I made beef bourguignon, apron over concert dress, musician to mama in moments, and we danced until 2. We missed you, darling. The dancing is never so good without you." "Last night? But Adi, what time was your concert?" "So everyone arrived about 7 for drinks. We began at 7:30. The singer and the pianist did the first half. I did second half with... Shy, have you seen a ghost?" Yeli's guts were twisting into a knot out of all proportion to yesterday evening's minuscule significance. "It wasn't in the afternoon?" Adila raised an eyebrow. "Why?" Nothing. She changed the subject fast. "Did you hear what happened to me in Hastings? The local conductor had appendicitis, so guess who conducted instead? Adrian Bolt." She gave a gurgle of laughter. "I know it's not funny really, but I was so pleased to see him." "He is the best of them all." Adila scooped Adrienne up into her arms. "Adri, darling poppet, come along. Auntie Yeye has to unpack. Let's take Caesar to the park." In Yeli's room, above the studio extension, a music stand perched between a silver-gilded writing table in the corner and antique wardrobes crammed with concert gowns, cloaks, coats, hats, and a rickety tower of Chinese silk boxes containing ostrich feather fans, mostly broken now, that she and Adila had collected as girls. While Yeli emptied the suitcase in her usual post-tour routine and chatted with Maria, Adila's new maid, she fought to regain her equilibrium. It was a normal weekday, normal as can be. Adila's husband Alec was at his chambers in the inner temple. The house's sounds were pattering about in their usual sequences of cleaning and, as far as possible, tidying. A piano tuner had arrived to attend to the Beckstein in the music room, and from the window she spotted her sister and niece in their hats and coats, making their way up the road. Caesar on his leash, padding beside them. Everything was normal. Soon she'd forget about Eastbourne, the Southerns, and that smallest yet most uncomfortable of coincidences. Chapter 2. Even if Yeli did not forget, she allowed her incoming tide of concerts, practicing and travel on slow trains and wave-buffeted ferries to submerge the incident. Until, that is, she and Adila found themselves at odds over a party that Baron Erik Palmstierna was holding at his Swedish ambassadorial residence on Portland Place. There'd be dignitaries galore, and members of the Society for Psychical Research too. Occasionally, one and the same. I don't think I can go, Yeli told Ardila. I have too much work to do. I may have to stay home and work as well, said Alec. The woman of the house sometimes forgot how demanding his job was. So discreet was he about it. Fine, said Ardila. Then don't go, but I shall be there to support Eric. I hope he hasn't asked you to play, Ardi. Darling, he has not, but of course I shall play if they want me to. A little Bach, perhaps. Nothing would deflect her. It would be quite wrong not to go. Yes, given the amount of time you spend with him, said Yeli. The comment was as barbed as she was capable of being. It will be worthwhile soon, even to you, Ardila growled. But these drives, what are you doing? Yeli said, then regretted it, lest her sister misinterpret this as a different kind of suspicion. Perhaps part of it was. At the notion that Ardila might ever part company with Alec, Yeli's slippery surfaces began to rip under her feet. We talk about the questions we should ask, said Ardila. Then we go back to the glass and we ask them. You're welcome to join us, but no, you don't believe in it. So don't be a Caesar in the manger. On any quietish Sunday when they were at home, after they had been to Mass and enjoyed a family lunch, the stocky and dapper figure of Eric Palmstierna would materialise outside in his car. If the day were fine, he and Ardila would go for a drive. Eric loved driving, the faster the better. She would trot out to meet him, in a flurry of hats, fur and bead necklaces, as eager as a young girl on a first date. Later they would have a session with the glass, for which Alec might or might not join them. Yeli was always relieved when Ardila's musical commitments interfered with the Baron's plans, for her sister's career as violinist remained almost as busy as her own. Ardila refused to accept Yeli's resistance to their psychical research, eager to point out that concern with the esoteric was part and parcel of artistic life, whether in the form of spiritualism, theosophy, or both. Yeli knew by heart the decades-long list of theosophically inclined artists. Alexander Scriabin, Paul Gauguin, Charles Rennie Mackintosh, D.H. Lawrence, Khalil Gibran, Gustav Holst, for a start. And I hardly need mention the Yeatses, Ardila added. But it's so simple. It's the heart of religion without the mumbo-jumbo. Yeli did not see why, just because it was fashionable, just because Willie Yeats was involved, along with his wife Georgie, one of her dearest friends, that meant she should be too. She had read many times pamphlets declaring that theosophy, or ageless wisdom, represented the unifying thread behind all the world's religions, the same truth illuminating the various beliefs, rituals, symbols, and myths. That was already quite enough mumbo-jumbo for her. She hated arguments, and she knew Ardila would never budge. Therefore, she would kiss her sister and let her win. Feeling mortified, she began a hunt in her room. Somewhere she was sure she had a photograph of herself and George in their 20s, glowing with joy at the top of Garsington's sloping lawn. Yeli with hair plaited and coiled around her ears, George with a long dress and a cascade of loosened tresses. Together, post-war, they had made up their minds in art alone one finds salvation. Her cupboards held box upon box of old letters, postcards, concert programmes and photos, but the one she wanted now was eluding her. She felt a tug of loneliness. George, Willie and their children had moved away to Dublin. Without you, she said to an imagined George, none of this would be happening. Why did you have to introduce us to Eric? George used to participate enthusiastically in the esoteric practices of salons like Eva Fowler's, those regular gatherings in which the literary met the musical, the artists met the patrons, the curious met those who intrigued them, and the glass game and table tapping were as likely pastimes as listening to a poetry recitation or a performance by Yeli, Ardila and their friends. Yeli remembered George explaining the automatic writing from messengers that she insisted she'd learnt to channel in order to fuel her husband's creativity. No wonder she and Eric became friends when he arrived in London as envoy. Yeli could still hear George's voice across party chatter. "Shai, Adi, come and meet this wonderful man." Moments later, Eric's bright gaze was locked with Adila's, and Yeli, to whom most men gravitated, turned away to find another drink, sensing her own superfluity. Perhaps because George was her friend, Eric's implantation in their life seemed her own fault. A blackbird was singing on the window ledge. Yeli slid open the casement and, making birdish noises, reached out a finger. The creature stared at her, head tilted, before springing away into the air. Yeli decided to escape the house by walking Caesar in Battersea Park, where she could look at a new sonata. She enjoyed learning music by reading the score in the sunlight under the trees. Once a piece was in her head, it was easier to transfer it later to the violin. She was fastening Caesar's lead when the telephone rang. Anna answered it in the study. "Yeli, come quick! It's Tom Spring Rice. He's in Dublin." Yeli experienced a brief rip in the fabric of time, along with an immediate awareness that something was wrong. She flew up the stairs. Anna tactfully left her alone to talk. That's the end of episode 2. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you again same time tomorrow, I hope. Bye-bye.